Let's get started. Number 6. Power loves certainty. Power has an annoying habit of making people feel like they are right. Give someone authority, and suddenly their opinions can start sounding like facts, even to themselves. Imagine you're handed a fancy title, a private office, several people who have to listen when you speak, and absolutely nobody is allowed to tell you that your idea is terrible. Congratulations, your brain has just entered a very dangerous environment. Research on power suggests that feeling powerful can change attention and behavior. People with power may become more focused on their goals, more willing to take risks, and sometimes less attentive to other people's perspectives. That can be useful when decisive action is necessary. It can also produce spectacular disasters when the person making decisions thinks every obstacle is merely a jealous peasant standing between them and greatness. The problem isn't that power automatically makes you stupid, it's that power can reduce the amount of feedback you receive. A normal person makes a ridiculous decision, and someone says, "Dude, that's ridiculous." A powerful person makes the same decision and someone says, "Interesting strategy." Then another person says, "Very visionary." Then somebody else writes a report explaining why the terrible decision was actually innovative, and suddenly the person responsible thinks they are a genius. This creates an echo chamber where confidence gets rewarded and correction gets punished. Eventually, the leader isn't surrounded by people who tell them what's true. They're surrounded by people who tell them what keeps their jobs. And nothing says, "excellent decision-making," quite like an entire room being too terrified to say, "Sir, this is a terrible idea." Number 5. Loud beats right. Ever notice how the person yelling the most in a meeting somehow wins the argument, even when their point makes zero logical sense? That's not a coincidence. That's basic human psychology exploiting your discomfort with conflict. Groups tend to conform toward whoever expresses the most certainty and volume, a phenomenon researchers link to social pressure and our deep evolutionary fear of standing out from the herd. Foolish people, freed from the burden of actually understanding complexity, can commit to a loud, simple, wrong answer with zero hesitation. Smart people, weighed down by nuance, tend to hedge, qualify, and mumble things like, "Well, it's complicated." Complicated doesn't win crowds. Simple and loud wins crowds. Your brain, when overwhelmed by competing opinions, unconsciously treats volume as a proxy for conviction, and conviction as a proxy for correctness. Even though those two things have never been reliably related in the history of human thought, it's basically a psychological hack, and foolish people stumble into using it perfectly, not through strategy, but because confidence comes naturally when you don't grasp the stakes. Meanwhile, the actual experts are stuck sounding wishy-washy simply for being honest about uncertainty. So the room nods along with the confident nonsense, and another spectacularly unqualified voice becomes the loudest one in charge. Number 4. Followers want heroes. People don't always want complicated leaders. Sometimes they want a hero. Someone who promises to fix everything, destroy the problem, punish the villains, and personally drag everyone into a glorious future while somehow making it sound extremely simple. Because complicated problems are exhausting. Imagine you're worried about the economy, politics, crime, war, technology, or basically anything else humans have managed to make complicated. Then someone appears and says, "Don't worry, I know exactly who's responsible, and I know exactly how to fix it." That's emotionally satisfying. Reality, meanwhile, is standing in the background holding a clipboard and screaming, "Actually, there are 14 interacting variables." Nobody wants to hear from reality. The psychology behind this is partly about uncertainty. When people feel threatened or confused, they can become more attracted to clear answers and strong leaders. A confident leader can reduce the uncomfortable feeling of not knowing what happens next. The problem is that certainty is not the same as accuracy. A leader can be completely wrong and still make followers feel safe. And once people emotionally invest in someone, they may start defending that person even when evidence turns against them. This is where things get particularly ridiculous. A failed prediction becomes misunderstood. A bad decision becomes necessary. A contradiction becomes strategy. Eventually, the leader isn't just a person anymore. They're an identity, and criticizing them starts feeling like criticizing the followers themselves. That's how ordinary political disagreement can transform into tribal warfare over a human being who, despite appearances, still occasionally loses their phone. Number 3. The Peter Principle. Here's a delightfully depressing workplace law you've definitely lived through without knowing its name. The Peter Principle states that people get promoted based on how well they did their last job, not how well they'll do their next one, and they keep climbing until they land in a role they're completely unqualified for. Then they just stay there forever. Think about it. Your brilliant salesperson gets promoted to sales manager, a completely different skill set involving people management instead of charm and persistence. They're bad at it, but companies rarely demote anyone, because demoting people is awkward and makes everyone feel weird at the holiday party. So the once great salesperson just marinates in a role they're mediocre at, blocking that seat from anyone actually suited for it. Multiply this across every organization on Earth, and you get entire hierarchies stacked with people, one promotion past their actual competence, each of them confidently fumbling through jobs they were never trained for. It's like watching someone ace a video game's tutorial level and then get shoved directly into the final boss fight with none of the necessary upgrades. The tragic twist is that foolishness often masks this failure perfectly, because incompetent people rarely notice they've been miscast. They just assume the job is supposed to feel this confusing. Congratulations, you've found the organizational chart's most quietly chaotic flaw. Number 2, the halo effect. You meet a tall, attractive, deep-voiced stranger, and within about 3 seconds your brain has already decided he's smart, trustworthy, and probably great at his job. This is the halo effect, and it's basically your brain being a lazy stereotyping machine that judges books entirely by their covers. One flashy trait, like height or charisma or a confident jawline, radiates outward and convinces you every other trait must be equally impressive. It's not true, obviously. Height has never once correlated with policy expertise, but try telling that to your instincts. Voters do this constantly, picking candidates who look presidential over candidates who'd actually be competent at the job, because looking the part triggers the same brain circuitry as being the part. Companies do it too, promoting the smooth-talking extrovert over the awkward genius who actually solves the hard problems. The halo effect is basically your brain shortcutting an entire personality assessment based on vibes alone, like judging a restaurant's food quality by how nice their sign looks. And the foolish, overconfident types tend to be exceptionally good at generating that surface-level shine, because unlike competence, charisma doesn't require years of quiet, humble effort. It just requires a firm handshake and zero self-awareness. So the glow gets mistaken for substance, the halo effect does its dirty work, and yet another underqualified charmer gets handed the keys to something important. Number 1, fear of smart rivals. Picture a mediocre leader surrounded by advisors, and ask yourself honestly, why would that leader ever hire someone smarter than themselves? Spoiler, they usually don't, and this single decision might be the most powerful force keeping foolish people in power, generation after generation. Psychologists call it downward hiring, a defensive pattern where insecure leaders surround themselves with people who won't outshine or challenge them. It feels safer in the moment, like never inviting anyone taller than you to a group photo, but the long-term effect is catastrophic, because now, the leadership pipeline is entirely populated with people specifically selected for not being threatening, which usually means not being especially competent either. Genuinely brilliant people get filtered out before they even reach the interview room, quietly rejected for the crime of being impressive. This creates a self-sustaining cycle. Foolish leaders hire slightly less foolish subordinates, who eventually become foolish leaders themselves, hiring their own unthreatening subordinates, and so on, like some horrifying game of organizational telephone. It's basically evolution in reverse, except instead of survival of the fittest, it's survival of the least intimidating. And that, more than any single bias or blind spot, is how mediocrity doesn't just sneak into power, it builds itself a throne, and hands out matching thrones to everyone equally unqualified to sit in them. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe.